Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of the Yakking Show. This is our Harmony channel, the path to lead you to wholeness. We do that by having expert guests on the show. Today is certainly no exception, but first let's introduce co-host Kathleen Beauvais. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, Peter. Thank you. And thank you also very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate having you. And Peter, today's topic is actually very timely for me. And that
I
topic
know.
that topic is grief and loss. I just lost a beloved pet last night of 17 years, but this isn't about me. This is about our very special guest that we have with us today. And I'm so privileged to welcome Vicki Paris Goodman to the show. Hello, Vicki. Welcome. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Kathleen and Peter.
Now, Vicki is a #1 best-selling author of To Sam with Love. Vicki lost her husband, Sam, to cancer in 2019. While navigating her profound grief, she was astonished when the tragic event unexpectedly opened up a world of opportunities. And I can't wait to hear about this, or possibilities rather. And it filled her with gratitude and optimism. And today she is here to yak with us about a better way of to think about loss and grief, and also of God's plan. So let's just jump right in, Vicki. Is there light at the end of the grief tunnel?
Yes, in fact, what I would say is that there really isn't a grief tunnel, or at the very least, there doesn't have to be. And I say that because, in my experience, God will help. Now, this is coming from a person who was raised, I'm
Mhm.
talking about myself, who was raised in a secular family and didn't
Mhm.
even begin to believe in a higher power until sometime before Sam passed, maybe just a very few years, but I hadn't taken that very far. It was a very rudimentary faith, if you will. But on the day Sam died, I don't even like to use the word died because I think he's still around. In fact, I know it. But on the day he passed, I was flooded with optimism and it was unseemly. I thought, what? I expected to be lost for a while, even though I'm a survivor type by nature. I thought this is going to take some time for me to get through. But it didn't happen that way, and I was very surprised. I was flooded with optimism. Because it started on the day he passed, I was tempted to kind of push it away because I thought, no, this is all wrong. But then I thought, I was so strong during our 2-year ordeal from diagnosis to Sam's passing. And I took such good care of him at the end when he needed to be taken care of. I thought maybe if good things want to come my way, maybe I should let them.
Mhm.
And it was the best decision I could have made. It was as if a helping hand was coming from somewhere outside myself to guide me. And this control freak let herself be led. I made a conscious decision to just go with it because it seemed better than the alternative.
Mm.
And I was certainly right about that.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yes.
So, for the benefit of our audience, I've lost people myself. How do you advise people to accept that helping hand, to use the metaphor you've just used? Because most people, myself included, to a degree, are so consumed with the immediate effects and feelings, sensations, and emotions of that grief, they can't look outside that sort of, call it a bubble that's surrounding them of grief. So how do you reach out for that helping hand?
Yeah.
One thing was realizing, and I say this comes from God too. I received these insights, and I don't think they came from within me. God blessed me with one insight in particular that was extremely helpful, and that was he asked of the question, is death really tragic? And that was an astonishing question for me. And then he immediately answered it for me. It's like, no, if you believe in a loving God and an exquisite afterlife, and if you believe that God has a plan, and that plan has to include, in most cases, one spouse, let's say, passing before the other one,
Mhm.
which means that his plan also includes more for the surviving spouse to do, more to learn, more to teach, more experiences to have. And then they will join the deceased spouse later at some later date. If all of that is true, then what exactly is tragic about someone passing, even a loved one? Maybe it's even a good thing. If they're going to this beautiful place to be with a loving God and the place is beautiful, but I don't believe that we should be grieving so hard. I think the
Okay.
main thing is, I think the main problem that we face is the unknown of what our life is going to look like after we lose that
Right.
loved one, or after we experience any profound disappointment in life. What are things going to look like after that? And as human beings, we don't face the unknown or uncertainty very readily.
Mhm.
We're always wary of what's going to happen next. So that takes some time to get through. And the fact that the person you may have lost isn't around anymore in the way you're used to them being. Their body and brain have died, only their soul lives on. So things are changing. And yes, it's the foundation for grief, for sure. But if you can look to that future as part of God's plan and just a part of everyday life, and resist the cultural conditioning to awfulize these circumstances,
Mhm.
you can begin to see light at the end of this tunnel of of what's next, because you don't know yet. You'd have to go
Right.
through and find out. And I think it does take a little courage, but it takes mostly just being open to being led, because God will lead you. If he led me, that has to be available to others. But one of the things that was most stunning about what happened after Sam passed was that opportunities started coming my way. And I felt motivated to embrace them. I thought, okay, I have this optimism I wasn't expecting. Why don't I try some of these things that are being put right in my lap? And I did, and they all worked out beautifully. If you would like a couple of examples,
Yes.
a friend right after Sam passed said, Vicki, listen, we have a huge group of friends that you don't know, because they're our karaoke group, and they're a wonderful group of people. Why don't you come this Saturday night? You don't have to sing. I just want you to meet them. They are wonderful people. You will love hanging out with them. They're your kind of people. So I decided to go, and I wasn't planning on singing, but I noticed when I got there that everybody was eating and drinking and gabbing, and no one was paying attention to the person singing. So I thought, well, this seems pretty safe. So I gave the karaoke jockey, that's what they call them, a song choice, and I got up and sang. Bottom line, long story short, turned out I could sing.
Very good.
And now I sing in public, usually
Really?
once or twice a year. Yeah, not often, but yeah, it turned out I was pretty good at it. So
Very good.
uh, that's one thing that came out. Another thing was I got an email announcing auditions for a staged reading at our community playhouse. Now, I had been a theater reviewer on the side for over 20 years in Long Beach, California. I just love the theater, but I never acted at all. And I thought someday I'm going to. Well, with a staged reading, there are scripts on stage. So you have to learn your lines, but you don't have to memorize all of them. And anyway, again, long story short, I wind up getting the female lead.
Oh, wow.
And I had a
Wow, very
and I
good.
had a ball. I know, I know. And there were all these people at the audition who were so experienced, I almost left. I was so intimidated. Yeah, that's how intimidated I was, but I didn't leave. Yeah. So these are the kinds of things that happened after Sam passed. And along with the opportunities and the insights and all these serendipitous events that were happening, strange things, um, that were all sort of conspiring to lead me forward in the most positive way possible. And after 2 years of this, I thought the story could help others. So I wrote my book, To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. And I guess the rest is history. It's been almost 5 years now since Sam passed.
Wow.
Right.
So you talk about grief pamphlets in your book and how, most psychiatrists or psychologists will say to you, well, there are stages of grief, and you might be in this stage or this stage or this stage, but you really contradict that. There doesn't have to be stages of grief. Can you explain that?
I didn't experience them. In fact, I marked that page in the book if you'd like me to read an excerpt.
Sure.
If not, I'll
Yes.
just sort of paraphrase.
No, go
Okay,
ahead.
so yeah, when I saw that question, I marked that page in the book. So, what the grief pamphlets and other information tell you is that there's an open wound that heals, but never fully. The grieving one is angry at the person who died, which in turn triggers guilt. There's fear and physical pain. A grieving person has no control over her life. She feels sorry for herself. It all constitutes a cycle, the cycle of grief. Some grieving souls roll up into a ball and refuse to emerge for weeks or months, maybe even years. Others keep themselves so busy they have no time to hurt. After some time has passed, the survivor can watch a television show without thinking about how much the deceased loved one would have enjoyed it. She can laugh and enjoy lunch with a friend without guilt rearing its head. When years have passed, a memory, a photo, or just about anything can aggravate the scar that remains within her. Things occasionally happen that chafe at the scar with quiet intensity and without warning. It will always be this way. Okay, now those were paraphrased quotes from these
Hmm.
pamphlets I read. So I read these things immediately after Sam died and fully expected these emotions and the cycle described to characterize my grief more or less. Everyone's is different. But my experience was so far removed from what I'd read, I began to question the intentions of the grief literature. Were the pamphlets meant to be a how-to set of instructions rather than a this is what you can expect narrative intended to stave off unpleasant surprises?
Right.
So that was what I wrote about that.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's true. I didn't go through any cycles that I was aware of, and I'm pretty self-aware. And
And
I've been especially so since Sam passed.
and
Yes.
you attribute that to what you said earlier about just keeping an open mind and welcoming opportunities or possibilities. It was just a mindset after Sam passed
Yes. Yes.
that
I
allowed
think
you
so
to.
many people, yes. I think so many people feel guilt moving on too quickly.
Mm,
There's all this cultural conditioning, and
mhm.
people succumb to the belief that, you know, their spouse's soul is watching from the afterlife, and so they might not move on with another relationship at some point when they're ready, out of guilt or out of feeling self-conscious about entering into a sexual relationship with someone new. There are all these things. There's guilt. But I've come to the realization that souls in heaven do not experience negative emotions like anger or jealousy or any of those things that are imagined. They want only what's best for the ones they left behind. They are cheering us on, and the best thing we can do to honor their memory is to move on, do that work that God has in his plan for us while we're still on earth, knowing and gaining comfort from knowing that we will join our loved one eventually.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Mhm.
So I don't believe that people need to roll up into a ball for any length of time. And I think what helped me was to establish a balance between activity and alone time. So all these opportunities
Mhm.
were coming my way. I call those the activities, and they can include just lunch with a friend too, whatever you're doing to socialize or just try something new, whatever it is. But you have to have that alone time, whether it's spent just sitting and thinking or reading a book or taking a hike or a walk, because you need to process what's happened to your
Mhm.
life. And that seemed obvious to me from the start. I don't think it's obvious to everyone, but again, I was experiencing this helping hand, which I now know was God,
Mm.
helping me along. So certain things were made obvious to me, and that was one of them. Establish that balance. In fact, it got put to the test during COVID.
Right.
I
Mhm.
actually finally did go into a couple of depressions because COVID came just a few months after Sam passed, and I was doing so well, but suddenly I was spending more time alone than
Yeah.
that balance I had achieved would have dictated,
Right.
and things didn't go so well. So, yeah.
Mm. Mm. So, from your experience and your insight you gained from talking to other people, someone who let's talk about losing a spouse, who loses a spouse tomorrow, what's the first step? How would you advise them to start on the road that you travel down and get start taking opportunities and getting over it? What's the first step?
I think the first step should be something I did not have available to me at that time. And that was what I talked about before, about seeing death and even any type of adversity in a new way,
Hmm.
as part of God's plan, as something that isn't an end of anything except the life that you knew. And now you have an opportunity to go on to a next chapter. It might not be the one you would choose first, but it can be spectacular. I think knowing those things can really help. If God's plan is as we said it is, for you as a survivor to remain behind to do more things, do those things. They might be the most rewarding things you've ever done in your life. I
Sure.
never thought I'd be on this mission to get a message out. I'm really not the type. This is not my nature to be doing what I'm doing, but it is now. Everything has changed.
Mhm.
And I think it's all fantastic.
Right.
Good, good, good. So can I just quickly comment on that? What brings to mind the example of, I'll use the example of my mother, that living in Rhodesia, there was a terrorist war and my parents were ambushed and my mother was very badly injured in an ambush
Oh.
and told she would never walk again. And then 4 months later, while she was still in hospital, my father was murdered in a second ambush. So my mother was then 56 years old. Country was falling to pieces. They had no, they were retired farmers. They had no pension, no money, and she's told she can never walk again. And the first time she came out of hospital was for my father's funeral. So my brother and I got her into a rehabilitation center, and she did walk again with canes and then crutches. And she lived till she was 90, and she did so much in that 34 years. But at the time, she had no hope, but she wouldn't give up. She also had a very strong faith. She was a regular church goer, strong Christian, and she said, "I'm not giving up, and I will be all right." And she moved back to England in the year 2000, lived on her own until 2 weeks before she died. But the point I'm trying to make, and what you're saying, is there is life after tragedy, and we might not know how that's going to unfold. As you talk chapters, we don't know what the next chapter will be, but there is something there, and one has to have the faith in that. Is that right?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think we have a lot of control over what it looks like.
Yeah.
When you're married, even to the love of your life, you make a lot of compromises. You both do. If if my husband, didn't like spicy hot food like I do, we would always, we'd go to an Indian restaurant or a Mexican restaurant and order everything mild. Well, Mexican, you can order your own food. So, something like one of the Asian cuisines where you kind of order family style.
Hmm.
We'd get everything mild, and I'd be a little disappointed, but that's the way it is. Now, I can find a friend who likes spicy food and go to one of these restaurants and get it 2 times hot.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just a silly example, but you do have a
sure.
lot of choices and you have a newfound freedom to to kind of make things up as you go along, and that can be
Right.
really fun, really exciting, really rewarding, and it can teach you a lot because here's a new chapter of life with new experiences. I think people who are married for a long time maybe get into certain ruts. It's
Oh,
not
yeah,
necessarily a bad thing. It just is kind of, a feature of a long-term relationship like
sure.
that. Well, now you can say, hey, can do that now.
Right.
And it's pretty exciting. Like, for example, within a few months of Sam passing, I felt this overwhelming need to travel, and it had to be something adventurous. I don't know why, it's just the way it felt. So I booked this expedition cruise to Antarctica. It
Really?
wound up not, because of COVID, it didn't go for another two
Uh,
years. But the intention was to go, and Sam didn't like cold places. He was from New York. He was from New York City and moved when he was 27 years old to Southern California because for one thing, yeah, well, there were a couple of reasons, but one of them was that it was too cold. So
Right.
he wouldn't have gone to Antarctica.
So you've touched on this already, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit. So if anyone in our audience is listening to this and is currently experiencing profound loss from any source, whether it's the loss of a spouse or divorce or anything else, what advice would you have for them?
First of all, I would tell them that life isn't over.
Mm.
It doesn't need to be even less than. It can move on so spectacularly, it might even be better than. It is all up to them.
Mm.
mhm.
And I know it's hard because sometimes you have to force yourself to do things when you're depressed or unsure or you don't know what it looks like, what it's going to look like.
Right.
But I think if you just take a step, you might say, oh, I thought that was going to be harder than it was. Maybe I can take another step. And it might take you forcing yourself at first, but I don't think you'll have to continue forcing yourself. I think you will find that this is a pretty good way to move on, and that things can be really great.
Right. Thank you.
That's the only thing I can think of to say about that. I know how I moved on, but I know everyone's different.
Right.
Sure.
I
Sure.
just know, I just know it can be great. And
Hmm.
maybe people have to find their own way of making it great.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And something I found in my experience, and I've had some really serious ups and downs. The in many situations in life, the expectation of bad things to come and is generally far worse than the reality of what happens when they do come, right?
That's exactly right. We always think the worst, but what is that
Absolutely.
about human nature?
Sure.
I
I
don't
know.
know. I don't know. So you have an engineering background. So does the practical experience from your engineering background, coupled with the more emotional, spiritual side of your musical background, those two sides of things, have they helped you cope better than most people do you think?
I don't know because, as an engineer, any engineer will tell you it's such an analytical way to be, mentally
Hmm.
speaking, that, and you're always looking for the logical thing.
Mm.
Well, there are logical aspects of this. Like, for example, the whole thing about death and loss in God's plan. Actually, I think that's logic. I think that the way our culture conditions us to awfulize these adversities is illogical,
Right.
given the truths that we know about
Mhm.
God and the afterlife and about his plan.
Mm.
So I think maybe the logic can bring us to the right place. However, I think most of it is emotional,
Mhm.
and realizing that that our if it has to do with adversity from having lost a loved one, that that person truly does want us to move on as quickly and as best as we can possibly move on and do all the things we want to do. And I don't think there's any mandated time that has to be spent not doing those things.
Mhm.
You can start immediately. None of this means I didn't grieve. I did. In fact, one of the things I did soon after Sam passed is I found a greeting card he'd given me just a few months before. That was the last greeting card he gave me before he got so sick that ammonia levels started rising in his body, and he couldn't, he wasn't thinking clearly because he had liver cancer, and that's what happens. So I found this greeting card from the Valentine's Day before he passed, just a few months, and I read it every night for a whole year. After I finished reading it, I kissed it at the bottom and put it away until the next night. And it just kept what we'd had together in focus and real for me. And it really helped. So there are things you can do to help yourself with the part that is sad.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've already mentioned that you authored the book To Sam with Love. So tell us a little bit more about this book and what motivated you specifically to write about your story.
Yeah, about 2 years after Sam passed, all of these things that I've been describing and more,
Mm-hmm.
the serendipitous events that we haven't even addressed, the opportunities coming my way, the insights, all of these things, um, when I looked back on them, the 2 years of them, I just thought, boy, this story could really help other people. So I wrote the book for that reason. And the way I set it up was sort of roughly into thirds. I thought that I should spend the first third talking about Sam and Sam's life, and a little of my own and our time together, just to give the reader an idea of who we are as people,
Mhm.
so that when Sam's passing came, the impact would be as great as possible for the reader. So then the middle third is, his diagnosis and treatment. It was 2 years
Mm.
of our life together from diagnosis until his passing. So I spend the middle third on that. And then the final third is all the things that happened for me after he passed. And I from the feedback I've gotten, I think it's a good balance. Um, I think the book is uplifting. The first third, especially, is funny because I'm pretty self-deprecating. And, Sam was a far more perfect individual than I ever could be. He was really a very emotionally, morally disciplined man, and he was very funny. And so, I kind of compare myself to him, and it almost never compares favorably. So there's some very funny parts of the book, and people said, "Wow, you managed to work some pretty good humor into that book." And I said, it's not a depressing book at all, not even the middle part, where he's had his diagnosis and, we go on to his passing.
Right.
It's, yeah, I think people can benefit from reading the book in a variety of ways.
Would you happen to have
No,
a
very
copy
good.
with you right there so that you can hold up for
Yes.
it? I would love to see it.
There we go.
Right. And how do people get that book? Is it on Amazon?
It is, but I have it discounted on my domain,
Okay.
so that they can get it there at the best price available, which is inspiredgrief.com
Okay.
/book.
Okay.
Okay.
And I also have some audio episodes that contain some of the insights with which I was blessed after I published the book. And they are short, they're only about 12 to 15 minutes each. They're free. I really encourage people to go right now online to inspiredgrief.com. All you have to do to subscribe is put your first name and email address in, and that will subscribe you to the 3 audio episodes that will transform the way you think of death and loss. I gave you a little inkling in this interview as to what that will be, but there's much more.
All right.
Okay.
So
that.
I've got to know. We will put that on. And for our audio listeners, those links will be in the descriptions on whatever platform you are listening to this on.
Right.
So, Vicki, this is not particularly about grief, but with your experience and the insights you've gained over the last few years and your background before that, many people are desperately concerned about the future, everything from inflation to housing prices. And it's not just North America. This is happening all over. War in the Middle East, Ukraine, you name it. People have a negative view on life. Now, Kathleen and I are not like that in the slightest, and I know that you're not, just listening to you. What's one tip, and we ask all our expert guests this question, what's one tip you could give our audience that could help them live a more contented and positive life starting from tomorrow? One thing that you can think of.
I think that knowing we ultimately don't have any control, I'm very politically oriented in terms of I do a lot of reading. I'm very well informed. A lot of people, don't pay much attention. I actually do. And of course, it's all very unsettling, what's happening today. But I ultimately know I don't have a whole lot of control. And that, again, it's probably all part of God's plan to teach us things. So rather than worrying, what I would suggest is thinking about what I, as an individual, and what we as the human race can learn from what's going on now. Concentrate on those things because you have control over those and you can grow from those things. So whatever happens will likely happen. I mean, if there are things you can do in your local community or even on a greater scale that you think can help to solve these problems, by all means, do them. But I think for most people, it's just about realizing we have no control, and there's still wonderful experiences to be had out there. We can help others, we can teach others, and we can learn and grow.
Wonderful. Well, thank you
Yeah,
so
very
much for
good.
that.
Thank you for that, Vicki.
Well, we are almost out
You're
of
welcome.
time, but how do people contact you, Vicki?
Oh, I also have a website, VickiParisGoodman.com. There's some blog articles there, and you can contact me. I think there's a contact form there, and I'd be happy to respond to anyone who wanted to contact me.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Very good. Great. Well, thank you from my side. Thank you very much, Vicki. It's very good. Lovely to hear you.
Oh, thank you for
Thank-
having me. I really enjoyed being with you so much.
Oh, well, the pleasure was ours, and thank you. And thank you also very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciated having you. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, we invite you to visit us at theyakkingshow.com. All you need to do is click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. So until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.